Good evening. My name is Lucia. I'm 29 years old, and I've been working as a nurse for almost 7 years. When I received the news that I had been accepted into a renowned hospital in São Paulo, I was so thrilled that I could hardly contain my tears. I had spent years searching for an opportunity in a prestigious place where I could learn more and grow professionally. My family had always supported me, but I felt the need to prove to myself that I was capable of taking this important step in my career. The moment I stepped into the hospital, the atmosphere of the clean hallways and modern equipment filled me with hope. It felt like I had finally arrived at the place I had always dreamed of. On my first day, I was welcomed by my new boss, Sonia, who led me to the emergency department where I would be stationed. She had a polite smile, but there was something strange in her gaze, a kind of coldness that I couldn't quite explain. At first, I didn't pay much attention to it. I just chalked it up to the stress of the job. The other staff members seemed quiet around her, often looking down or trying to disguise their anxiety. Despite this, I focused on my work, striving to demonstrate my dedication. After all, this was how I believed I could earn respect and trust. Deep down, I thought that as long as I was a dedicated professional, everything would go well. As the weeks passed, I began to settle into the rhythm of the hospital and won the sympathy of many patients. I've always enjoyed chatting while administering medications or changing dressings, asking simple questions like, "Are you comfortable?" or "How was your night?" These small gestures helped build trust, and for me, being a nurse is about much more than following protocols. It's about caring for vulnerable people. However, I began to notice that my style of working seemed to attract Sonia's attention in a way I couldn't decipher. Sometimes I would catch her watching me from a distance without blinking, which made me feel uncomfortable. It wasn't long before strange things started happening. Small things like patient records going missing, which I was certain I had filed correctly. On other occasions, I would show up for my shift and find out that my schedule had been changed without prior notice, making me look irresponsible in front of the team. I tried to speak with Sonia about it, but she always denied knowing anything or acted as though it was all a misunderstanding, offering me that same cold smile with a hint of sarcasm. I tried to stay calm, but deep down, I felt like there was a very clear intention behind these incidents. I tried not to let these small sabotages shake my confidence, but they started affecting my routine. Every time I noticed a mistake in a patient record or found equipment out of place, I couldn't shake the feeling that Sonia was behind it all. In the hallways, some colleagues avoided eye contact with me, as if they were afraid of being seen talking to me. The few who did acknowledge me would drop subtle hints about keeping a low profile to avoid getting burned. I didn't understand how someone could thrive off the fear of others, but I was beginning to see that this was exactly what was happening. The sense that I was walking on eggshells grew stronger, and my sleep began to deteriorate. By the third week of work, I started having more frequent headaches to the point where they would interfere with my shifts. Nothing worked, neither painkillers nor cold compresses. Sometimes I had to lean on the medication counter, taking deep breaths and waiting for the pain to subside. The atmosphere in the department always seemed heavy whenever Sonia was around, and I couldn't deny that I began to associate her presence with my migraines. At night, sleep was elusive. Even though I was exhausted, I would lie awake, replaying everything that had happened during the day, mentally reviewing every detail to make sure I hadn't made any mistakes. But the mistakes kept happening. Even when I double-checked every procedure carefully, Sonia would occasionally call me into her office with a tone of false concern, telling me my reports were incomplete or that there had been patient complaints about me. I could never find concrete evidence that she was fabricating these occurrences, but everything always felt so artificial, too perfect in its timing. One patient even confided in me that they really liked me and would never have complained, directly contradicting what Sonia had said. My mind was clouded with doubts and the pressure was mounting. One morning I felt such a heavy weight on my chest that I thought I was going to pass out. As my health started to falter and the toxic atmosphere became unbearable, I began to seriously consider whether it was time to quit this dream hospital. I didn't want to admit that walking away might be the best option because I had fought so hard to get here. I also felt like leaving would be acknowledging that Sonia had won, which went against everything I believed as a professional. Still, the insomnia worsened. The migraines seemed to have set up permanent residence in my head, and I hardly recognized myself anymore. It was at this point that I realized I needed help, but I didn't know who to turn to. The fear of retaliation was overpowering, and ironically, I felt more and more alone in that place, surrounded by people. Gradually, I began to realize that I wasn't the only one suffering under Sonia's control. Some nursing assistants, and even younger doctors, seemed to behave as if they were constantly being watched, choosing their words carefully before speaking. One night, a colleague approached me in the cafeteria and in a nearly whispered tone told me that he had gone through similar issues when he joined the department. That conversation offered me brief relief, as it confirmed I wasn't alone or paranoid. But it also made me even more anxious, because it seemed that Sonia chose her victims carefully, perhaps the most dedicated, or those who stood out easily. Each second at the hospital now felt like it was laden with heavy energy, and I couldn't shake the thought that something worse could happen. To try to preserve my sanity, I started writing everything down in a notebook: schedules, procedures, patient names, even important conversations I witnessed. I wanted to have concrete proof in case I was accused of something again. Despite knowing that presenting a notebook as official evidence wouldn't be easy, it gave me some mental security. My fear was that Sonia would find out and retaliate even more aggressively. Still, it was a risk I was willing to take, as my mental health was already fragile, and my body was crying out for rest. One day, I received a call from my mother asking if everything was okay with me. She said that my voice sounded distant, almost apathetic, and that I seemed like a stranger even to her. It was at that moment that it hit me how deep I had sunk into a toxic environment. I had been trying to keep my head up, not to show weakness, but the truth was that the situation was destroying me from the inside. Even though I had dreamed of growing at this hospital, nothing justified the price I was paying. Despite everything, I hesitated to make a drastic decision, perhaps out of fear that confirming my resignation would mean admitting that all my efforts had been in vain. After a particularly bad night, in which I couldn't sleep at all, I noticed that my symptoms had worsened significantly. The headache was now constant without relief, and the weight on my chest made breathing deeply feel like a challenge. At work, I tried to disguise it, not wanting to alarm anyone, but I had to stop in the bathroom multiple times just to collect myself. That day, I almost let a tear slip in front of Sonia when she appeared with another absurd accusation, another missing patient record that I supposedly should have delivered. It was at this point that I started to seriously question whether it was worth continuing to fight in this place. The final straw came on a Friday afternoon when I had to redo a simple procedure, changing an IV for a patient, because the system showed that I hadn't done it. I remember the patient being outraged and even confirming to the management that I had done everything correctly. Still, Sonia acted as if I was to blame for some error in the record, but this time something inside me broke. The fatigue, the exhaustion, and all the accumulated frustration exploded all at once. Before I realized it, my voice rang out through the department. "Enough, Sonia. I know what you're doing." Her cold gaze flashed with a hint of surprise, but her expression quickly returned to that same subtle smile. "I don't know what you're talking about, Lucia. Maybe you're just tired of being sabotaged, tired of seeing you manipulate the team through fear. I'm sure, and you know what's worse? You're not just hurting me. You're hurting everyone here. They're scared of you and you feed on that fear." A heavy silence filled the air, and I noticed a few colleagues finally raise their heads. For a moment I thought Sonia would react with her usual coldness, but I saw something different: discomfort. She stared at me for a few more seconds before letting out a low, humorless laugh. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," she said. "Oh, I know more than you think," I retorted. What had once seemed like a sign of weakness now became a matter of survival. I decided to submit my resignation the following week. But before I could even hand in my letter, something unexpected happened at the hospital. A patient died during a routine surgery, and rumors began to spread rapidly through the hallways. Tension hung in the air, and I immediately noticed something strange about the story. It was being said that a serious medical error had been made, possibly in prescribing or administering medication. However, many people were whispering that all the chaos was tied to Sonia's supervision, claiming that she had made last-minute changes or ignored important warnings. Less than 24 hours later, an internal investigation was launched, and the hospital's management decided to suspend Sonia until everything was clarified. The news spread through the floors like wildfire, and I remember the mix of relief and fear I felt. Relief because the person who had terrorized me wouldn't be there to torment me anymore. Fear because a human life had been lost, something irreversible and devastating. That night I went home exhausted, my mind racing. But strangely, for the first time in weeks, I was able to sleep a little better. I didn't have nightmares, I didn't wake up with a throbbing head, and the weight on my chest slowly dissipated. The next morning I woke up pain-free, as though my body had finally been allowed to rest. It was almost surreal. The insomnia, the migraines, that horrible feeling of suffocation, it was all gone, as if it had never existed. I had to conclude that somehow, the emotional pressure that Sonia had placed on me, whether directly or indirectly, had triggered all my symptoms. I was even more shocked by how quickly everything was resolved after her suspension. It's frightening to think about the power that someone can have over our mental and physical health. Although I still don't know how to feel about everything that happened, I needed to share this experience to warn others that toxic environments and people can affect us in unimaginable ways. For now, I've decided to stay at the hospital to honor my patients, but I won't deny that I look back and shudder at what I went through. Good evening, my name is Mariana. I'm 31 years old and I've never really believed in things like this. But what I experienced in that apartment made me question everything. I need to share this story to try to understand whether it was all just in my head or if there was something more happening there. When all of this started, I had just moved into a new apartment in the interior of São Paulo. My husband Henrique and I were looking for a more peaceful place to live. When we found this old property, we were excited. The building was a bit outdated, and the surrounding area felt almost too quiet, so much so that it was a bit unnerving. I attributed this strange feeling to the musty smell in the hallways and the creaking floors beneath my feet. Henrique, on the other hand, didn't notice anything unusual. He was focused on the savings we'd make and the convenience of living close to his workplace. Deep down, I also convinced myself that this was too good an opportunity to pass up. It was a spacious apartment with 2 bedrooms, a large living room and a kitchen bathed in natural light, thanks to a window overlooking the inner courtyard. I clung to the idea that this could be our fresh start, far away from the noise and stress of the big city. The first few weeks were as peaceful as I'd imagined, almost boring really. I managed to get all the furniture in place and even freshened up the walls, painting each room with light, cozy colors. I love decorating, so I spent my days buying little decorations, pictures and lamps to make our corner more inviting. During these little breaks, I sometimes noticed a curious gaze coming from the window above us. I ignored it at first, and later learned that the lady who lived upstairs, Donna Odette, rarely came downstairs. According to the few neighbors I had met, she didn't like to talk much. I didn't think much of it. I've always believed older people have their routines and quirks. What truly began to bother me were the anonymous notes that kept appearing in my mailbox with strange messages like, "You shouldn't be here." At first I thought it was just a cruel prank, but it revived that uncomfortable feeling I'd had from the very first day. I spoke to Henrique about the notes, but he dismissed them as nonsense. "Don't pay attention to this rubbish," he said, shaking his head. I understood his point of view, but it was hard to ignore how strange it felt, especially when it came from neighbors in such a seemingly peaceful place. Over time, I started to feel more and more watched. I even considered installing security cameras, but our budget was tight, and the rent was already stretching us thin, so I just made sure to lock all the doors and windows securely. It was around this time that something shifted within me. I began to suffer from frequent insomnia, tossing and turning in bed for hours before I could finally drift off. But when I did manage to sleep, nightmares would chase me, always placing me in dark rooms with the sensation of being suffocated by someone I couldn't see. When I woke up, my heart would race, and I'd find myself gasping for air, drenched in sweat, as though I had truly lived through it. Henrique, on the other hand, slept soundly, never noticing anything strange. The nights became a torment, and during the day, I felt drained and couldn't focus on even the most basic tasks. I started losing hair, which terrified me since I've always been very conscious of my appearance. My hair would fall out in clumps, even in the shower, or when I ran my fingers lightly through it. To make matters worse, my skin turned pale, and I felt weak with a constant dizziness that had no explanation. I went to the doctor a few times and had blood tests done, but nothing abnormal showed up, which only made me more anxious. I couldn't explain what was happening, but I was certain of one thing. The apartment seemed to be rejecting me in some way. It felt as if the walls were heavy, absorbing my energy, draining me. It didn't take long for me to start suspecting Donna Odette was behind the strange notes. One day, I decided to go upstairs and speak with her to clear up the situation. I rang the doorbell, but no one answered, even though I was sure I heard slow footsteps approaching the door. I waited a bit longer, knocking softly, but still no answer. The hallway was eerily silent, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Feeling foolish, I left. But when I got back to my floor, I thought I heard her doorknob turn, as if someone was peeking at me. The feeling of being watched only grew stronger. On the rare occasions I went out to the market or pharmacy, I felt eyes on me, as though the neighbors wanted me out. I tried to keep my head high, but the anxiety built with each new note that appeared in my mailbox. One of those sleepless nights I heard footsteps coming from the floor above. Slow, dragging steps, followed by a faint murmur. I woke up terrified, grabbing my phone to check the time. It was past 3 a.m. Normally, I would have attributed the sounds to old pipes or my imagination, but this felt real. Henrique slept deeply beside me, breathing steadily. I nudged him to wake him up and help me figure out what was going on, but he just rolled over, complaining of exhaustion. So I decided to get up and see if I could spot any lights on in Donna Odette's apartment from the window. But it was pitch black, the entire building in darkness. I returned to the bedroom with an unsettling feeling, as if an unseen presence was watching every step I took, but remained hidden. As the days went by, in addition to the nightmares, I began experiencing severe anxiety attacks, pushing me to the brink of paranoia. My body felt like it was withering away. My face became hollow, and simply climbing the building stairs left me breathless. To avoid the fatigue, I started taking the elevator, even though I hated that slow, noisy box. One afternoon, while returning from the market, I felt a sudden chill as I entered the elevator. It felt like someone was standing right behind me, even though the cabin was empty. I even heard a faint snapping sound near my ear. When I looked around, there was nothing there. It was terrifying because I could no longer tell what was real and what was just my imagination. Henrique continued to be oblivious to everything, which made me feel even more alone and insecure. In the meantime, I tried to distract myself. I started painting watercolors on the balcony and tried watching light series, hoping to avoid feeding into the heavy atmosphere. But even the paint dried in a strange way, forming stains that looked like distorted faces. Maybe it was just coincidence, but to me it felt like another sign that something was very wrong. I began to seriously consider moving to another place, but Henrique thought that such a sudden change would be an unnecessary expense. He insisted that I just needed to rest better. Deep down, I hoped that with time everything would settle down, but a part of me knew that the strange occurrences were intensifying. Every time I looked at the empty, silent apartment upstairs, my heart raced as if warning me that something far worse was coming. Then came the night when everything seemed to crumble. I was exhausted from another night of insomnia and anxiety. I fell asleep almost instantly when I finally lay down. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but I remember opening my eyes and realizing I couldn't move. My entire body was paralyzed, and my chest was rising and falling in an enormous effort to take in air. I was terrified, feeling as if an invisible hand was pressing down on my chest, preventing me from breathing properly. I tried to call for Henrique, but no sound came out. It felt like my throat was being squeezed. My eyes scanned the room for any sign of light, and all I could see was a strange shadow in the corner of the room near the floor, gently pulsating every time I tried to catch my breath. I've never felt so helpless in my life. Finally, when I managed to let out a faint groan, the pressure seemed to lift, and the room returned to normal in an instant. Henrique woke up startled, shaking me by the shoulder, but I could barely explain what had happened. I felt a mix of relief and panic because that sensation of not being able to move wasn't just a nightmare. I had been fully aware the entire time. I spent the rest of the night crying with the light on, too afraid to close my eyes again. The next morning, my face was swollen from the tears, and I couldn't stop trembling. That's when I decided I had to get help. I needed to understand why this was happening to me, why I felt consumed, and especially why the apartment seemed to turn against me. I spoke with a new neighbor, Jeannette, who had recently moved to the ground floor. She recommended a healer who lived a few streets away. She's a very wise woman. They call her Donna Celia, Jeannette told me, with a concerned look. I wasn't the type to visit a healer, but I was so desperate I agreed right away. I called Donna Celia, and to my surprise, she answered right away. We arranged to meet that very afternoon because I felt like I couldn't wait any longer. After hanging up the phone, a thought crossed my mind. Was this the push I needed to finally uncover the truth about that place? I left the apartment with Henrique giving me a skeptical look. He still didn't fully buy into this spiritual practice, so he didn't come with me. I went alone. Donna Celia's house was old but had a simple, welcoming facade. As soon as she opened the door, I was enveloped by the scent of fresh herbs like rue and alacrim. She led me to a modest room filled with plant pots and religious images from various faiths. Without me saying much, she looked me in the eyes and said in a calm voice, "There's something very dark around you." My legs trembled, but I took a deep breath and told her everything. From the notes to the nighttime suffocation, from Donna Odette's presence to the sense that the apartment simply hated me. She listened attentively, not showing any surprise. When I finished, Donna Celia closed her eyes and took a deep breath, as if absorbing my words, then responded, "This isn't the first case like this I've treated in this neighborhood. The presence you feel doesn't come from just Donna Odette," she continued, her eyes opening. "There's an older energy in that apartment. There are rumors that a young woman named Amanda lived there before you and disappeared without a trace." She explained further that according to what she had heard from others, Donna Odette had a mysterious connection to Amanda, possibly of friendship or protection. And it seemed that every woman who tried to live in that apartment would suffer the consequences of an energy filled with resentment, one that didn't want to be replaced. I was stunned, struggling to process the idea of occupying the space of someone who had never truly left. It took me a few seconds to react. My first instinct was to dismiss it as fantasy, but then I remembered the nightmares, the notes, and how my body was deteriorating without explanation. Suddenly everything started to make sense. Donna Celia explained that Donna Odetta had likely done something to try to expel me, not out of malice, but because she feared what would happen to me if I stayed. She proposed doing a ritual to break the spell, using herbs, prayers, and a bath with coarse salt. I accepted without hesitation, willing to try anything to end that nightmare. During the ritual, I felt an intense heat spread through my body, as if something was being pulled out of me. It was uncomfortable, but also brought an immediate sense of relief. When I returned home, I noticed the atmosphere felt lighter, as if the air was circulating better. The oppressive feeling and the weight on my shoulders were gone. In the following nights, I managed to sleep without nightmares, and my insomnia gradually faded. My hair stopped falling out as much, and I regained some of my energy. Enrique noticed the change and was even impressed, though he didn't want to admit that the ritual might have helped. As for Donna Odette, she had disappeared, not just from my sight, but from the entire building. I went to her apartment again and found the door locked with no signs of movement. I asked the neighbors, and they all said they hadn't seen the elderly lady in days. Her bills hadn't been paid, and the lights on the upper floor stayed off, suggesting that no one was living there anymore. Her disappearance raised suspicions, but no one seemed to know for sure what had happened. It was all shrouded in an eerie silence, as though people were afraid to speak. And those were today's stories. Have you ever heard any stories similar to the ones told today? Let me know in the comments which of the 5 stories caught your attention the most. If you liked it, don't forget to like and get ready, because in the next video, I'll bring more disturbing stories.